Hello my friends, and welcome to this next video in this series where we shall be looking at manipulating arrays in JavaScript. So in the previous video, we saw that we can declare an array by using the square bracket notation like this, and then we can then store items inside of the array. So we store $10 billion, $20 billion, 34, 1, and a function. And then at the end, we assigned this array to a variable of items right here. And we were able to access the individual items inside of the array using the index property. So we set something like items and then write the index number inside of the square bracket right here. So if we wanted to access the item at the index 0, which is $10 billion, we would write 0 right here. And we can then log these items 0 to the console, and we're going to get $10 billion back. So if I say something like console.log, and then right here, and save the file, then if we look at our browser's console, we're going to get $10 billion back. We also look at the length property of an array, which is the number of items inside of the array. So if I were to log items.length, we're going to get 5, since currently we have 5 items inside of this array. Now, let's look at more ways to manipulate an array in JavaScript. And the first thing we're going to look at is the indexOf function. So far, we've been able to access the item inside of an array by saying something like items, and then we use square bracket like this, and then we give the index number of that item. But remember, we're only able to use this index number right here if we know the particular index number of the item that we're trying to access. So in this case, we know that $10 billion is at the index of 0. So if we were to access item 0, we're going to get $10 billion printed on the console, right? But what if we don't know the index number, but then we know the item that we're looking for? So in this case, we know $10 billion is stored inside of this items array. But let's assume that we know that $10 billion exists inside of this array, but we don't know the index number of this $10 billion. So what we can do, we can say something like items.indexOf, and then open parentheses like this. And inside of this parenthesis, we're going to give the item whose index number we want to find. So let's say we want to find $10 billion. So I'm going to say $10 billion. So as soon as I save, you see that right here on our console, we're going to get 0. If we were to say $20 billion instead, so let me change this to $20 billion and save, we get 1. So this indexOf method right here gives us the ability to get the index position of an item in an array. And mind you, when trying to access the index number of an item, make sure to give correctly how the item was written inside of the array. So imagine right here, after the 20, we do not include a space. So there is no space between 20 and billion. If you look here, it is not the same thing, right? So we're not going to get the correct value of 1. Instead, we're going to get a -1. So if you look at the console right now, you can see we get -1. And -1 indicates that this $20 billion, the way we have written it, does not exist within the array right here. So it must be the same way it was written inside of the array. Otherwise, we'll get a -1. So this is something cool to have in mind. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is the push function. Now, let me first of all delete this one, the indexOf property. And then let's talk about the push function. Push is used to push an item inside of an array. Right now we have $10 billion, $20 billion, 34, 1, and a function. But let's say that at the end of this function, we want to push something like $50 billion. So how do we do that? There are many ways to do that. What we can do is actually come here after the function and just write $50 billion like so. So in this way, we have added another item of $50 billion to this array. But this way is actually static, right? It can be boring to do it this way. But this is a very simple way to do it. First of all, let me delete this. One thing we can do is to use the push method or the push function. So I'm going to say items.push and then open the parenthesis. So within the parenthesis, we're going to write out the item that we want to push to the end of the array. The push method or the push function pushes an item to the end of an array. So let me say items.push $50 billion like so. And then what I'm going to do is actually try to print items to the console. That is, print our array to the console. So when I save, we're going to get two values printed on the console. So let's see what we get. All right, so the first value we get right here is 6. And where is this 6 coming from? 6 is coming from the first console.log statement right here. So we're getting 6 because this items.push is a function that returns the new length of the array. If you look closely, you can see that the original length of this array is 5. But as soon as we pushed $50 billion to the array, the length will change to 6. So the key thing to note is that when you use items.push, it returns a value which is equals to the new length of the array. So that's why we got a 6 printed on the console. And then the second value right here is just the items array. And if you look closely, you can see that $50 billion have been added to this array. And in order not to confuse you with this first console statement, let me do something like take this one away. And then I'm going to come up on line 4 and say something like, let index number equals, and then I'm going to say items.push $50 billion. So, and I'm going to come right here to this console and then log index number to the console. So we're going to get 6. So what happens on line 5 is that when this runs, 6, which is the new length of this array, returns and is stored inside of this index number variable. So when I save our file, I'm still going to get the same thing because we're logging index number to the console, which is 6, and then items is right here. So what if we try to push more items to this array? So let me say on the next line, items.push, and then let me say $60 billion. Now you must be wondering, it seems I love dollars so much. All right, so I'm going to say $60 billion like so. And what I'm going to do is store it in another variable. And I'm going to say, let's second index equals items.push $60 billion. So I'm going to also log second index to the console. So I'm going to say console.log second index. So let me save this file. And now you can see on our console, we have the first number 6 logged to the console, which is coming from this first console.log statement right here. And it's logging index number to the console. And that index number was given on this line 5. And so it returned the new length of the array. And when we pushed yet another item to the array, of course, the length changed to 7, from 6 to 7, right? And so that's why this statement right here returned 7. And then the last statement right here returned the value of our array. So if you look closely, we're having $10 billion, $20 billion, 34, 1, a function. Then we have $50 billion and $60 billion. So that's the basics of this push function. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is how to add item to the beginning of the array using the unshift function. Now, if we wanted to add an item to the beginning of the array, how do we do it? First of all, we can come right here and add that particular item. So let's say we wanted to add something like a frog. So I'm going to write another string right here and say a frog. And of course, separate it with a comma. Right now you can see that my strings are not consistent. I use the single quote right here and single quote right here. And here I'm using double quotes. This is not really nice. So I'm going to change it back. Let me use single quote and I'm going to say a frog. Now, the first item in our array is a frog. All right. So this is one way to do it. We can just come directly to the array and modify it directly. But like I said, this is not usually the way we would do it in real coding. So I'm going to use the unshift function. So let me take this one away like this. And then let me take all this out. And then I'm going to say items dot unshift like this. And so inside of the unshift function, I'm going to provide the value that we want to add to the beginning of our array. So I'm going to say a frog like this. So after doing this, we'll have a frog in front of our array. So the next thing on the line is to console.log items. So I'm going to say items, and then we'll see what our new array is. So let me save this. Now, as soon as I save, right here, you can see that we have a frog as the first thing in our array, no longer $10 billion. Now, the next function that I want us to look at is the pop function. The pop function enables us to remove the last thing inside of our array. So, if I were to say, first of all, delete this console.log statement and delete this one right here. So I can say something like items dot pop. We're not going to provide anything, any string or any value at all. So what it is going to do is just to remove the last item inside of this array. So after writing this code right here and on the next line, I try to log the items to the console, the items array. We're going to see that this function right here will no longer exist. So let me save this. And when we come here to the console, you can see that we just have $10 billion, $20 billion, 34, and 1. And if we try to duplicate this code, so I'm going to copy and paste it on the next line. So we want to remove both this function and the 1 right here. So after we call this one on line 6, it's going to remove the function. And then this one on line 7 is going to remove the 1 right here. So when I save our JavaScript file, we'll see that we just get $10 billion, $20 billion, and 34. So 1 and this function right here have been removed. And one thing that this pop function returns is that item that has been removed. So if we wanted to know the items that have been removed, we could store them in a variable and print them to the console. So I can say something like, let item 1 equals items.pop, and then on the second one, I can say let item 2 equals items.pop. So I can try to access this item 1 and item 2. So let me actually print them to the console. So I'm going to say console.log item 1 and then console.log item 2, like so. So when I save this file, you see that we get this function and then the 1 printed on the console. So let me save. So right here, you see that we get the function right here and we get the 1 right here. So that's how the pop function works. Now, the next function we're going to be looking at is the shift function. Now, let me first of all delete all of this right here. And then let's see how we can use the shift function. The shift function actually removes the first item in an array. The pop removes the last item in the array, while the shift function removes the first item in the array. So if I were to say something like items dot shift like this, what happens is that this $10 billion will be eliminated from the array. So let's try to log our items array to the console one more time and save. So right here you can see that we now have $20 billion, 34, 1, and then f, which represents a function. So we no longer have the $10 billion, and that's because we called this function right here. So if we were to call the shift function one more time, so let me say items.shift like this. So what it means is that this first one right here on the line 4 will remove the $10 billion, and the second shift function right here will remove the $20 billion. So we'll be left with 34, 1, and a function. So let's still log our items to the console. Now you can see we just have 34, 1, and the function right here. So that's the basics of the shift function. So let's look at how the splice function works in JavaScript. So the splice function is used to remove items inside of an array starting from a particular index. So let's say we want to remove all the items starting from $20 billion all the way to this function right here and just be left with the $10 billion. How do we do it? We can use the splice function. So what do we do? Right here, let me delete all of this code, and I'm going to say items dot splice, and then what I'm going to do is to provide the index where I want to start splicing from. That is the index where I want to start removing from. Let's say I want to start removing from the index 1, which is from this $20 billion. So I'm going to provide 1 and then comma, and the next value I'm supposed to provide is how many items I want to splice off. So let's say I want to splice off this 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to provide 4 right here. So what happens is this 1 represents an index. This 4 represents the number of items I want to remove from the array. So we're going to have $20 billion, 34, 1, and this function right here removed from this array. So after calling this function on line 6, let me try to log our items array once more to the console. So I'm going to say console.log items like this. And when I save, you see that we're just left with $10 billion. So the items from index 1 down to 4 items were removed. So instead of writing 4 here, if I had written 2, so that means I want only 2 items to be removed starting from index 1. So what happens is that $20 billion will be removed and 34 will be removed, since we only want 2 items to be removed. So we're going to have $10 billion, 1, and the function returned when we log our items to the console. So as soon as I save this, you can see we just get the $10 billion, 1, and then our function right here on the console. So that's how the splice function works. Also, we've talked about index property of an array, right? And then we said it's the position of the items instead of an array. We can also assign a value to a particular index in an array by doing something like items, and then we open the square bracket and then write the index where we want to assign that value. So I can say item 7 equals, let's say, $90 billion right here. So I'm assigning a value of $90 billion to the 7th index of this items array. So let's try to bring the items array to the console and see what we got. So I'm going to say console.log items and save. So now we're getting this logged onto the console. And what is happening here? If you look closely, we have $10 billion, $20 billion, 34, 1, the function. And then we're having this funny looking thing here that says empty multiplied by 2. So what this is saying is that we have 2 empty positions. Because remember, this f is at an index of 4, right? So we have 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 for this function right here. So we have 2 more index positions, 5 and 6, all right? And they are empty. And then we now have this one at index of 7, which is what we did right here, assigning $90 billion to index of 7 inside of the items array. And why did this happen? Remember, we have item at the 0 index, 1 index, 2 index, 3 index, and then 4th index. So we did not assign anything to the 5th and 6th index, but then went ahead to assign something to the 7th index. So what now happened is that the 5th and the 6th index will be empty, which is what is represented here. Okay, but then let's try to access the length property of this items array. So I'm going to say console.log items.length. And when I save, you can see we get the value of 8 right here. We're getting a value of 8 printed to the console. So which means that we have 8 items inside of this array. But then 2 index positions are empty. All right. So we have $10 billion, $20 billion, 34, 1, a function. And then what is inside of the 5th index? It is empty. What is inside of the 6th index? It is empty. And then 7th index has $90 billion. So if you count everything, we have 8 items. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, which are 2 empty index positions. And then we have 8. So that gives us 8 as the length of this array. That's a very long explanation, but I hope you get the point. And what we can do actually is to assign maybe some values to those 5th and 6th index. So we can say something like items and then open the square bracket and say 5th. That is, we want to assign something to the 5th index. And what do I want to assign? I want to assign $100 billion like this. And then let me save this. Now we have $100 billion on the 5th index. Meanwhile, our length is still 8, right? Because remember, those initial positions were empty. And let me add one more item to this array right here. And if you look closely, you can see already we just now have one empty index position. Initially, it was empty multiplied by 2. But now we filled one of the empty index, which is the 5th index, with something. Now let's fill the next one with something. Let's say items and then 6th index like this equals trees like this. And when I save, so right now we can see we have, after the function, we have $100 billion, trees, $90 billion. And they still add up to have 8 items inside of the array. So these are simple ways of manipulating arrays in JavaScript. There are 2 more functions that we can use to manipulate an array, and they are the map function and the filter function. We're going to be looking at the map function and the filter function in the next video. Please, my friends, like my videos and subscribe to my channel. It will go a long way in helping me to create videos like this.